Perfect. Thanks, Michael. And I will go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that, or it starts pulling up on everyone's screens. I see some head nods. Perfect. So I am Peggy Garcia. I work for the Appalachian Children Coalition. I also do some consulting on the side. Kind of background on myself. I was the director of Athens County Family and Children First Council prior to taking on this role. And I have presented many ECHO cases while I was the director there. So they reached out and really asked me to follow up with what happens after you present. So let's see if it'll let me. There we go. So you just finished presenting ECHO. It was nerve-wracking. You had to know all of this information. You had the team members hopefully be a part of it. You had to know, what was on the IEP, what, assessments were going on. And now what do you do next? So for the team members, be sure that you have all the information and the team members available to you. Is the local Family and Children First Council included? If they are not, get them included. That should be your number one step after an ECHO presentation if they aren't already involved. I know I've seen a couple ECHOs that are coming from outside of an FCFC presenter. So specifically for those, make sure that your local FCFC service coordinator is involved. They are going to have such a huge knowledge base on the resources available in the area. And if those resources aren't available in the area, they have that knowledge base of where those families can go, how to bring those resources to them, and just be able to provide that coordination for the team, for the recommendations that you receive. Was everyone on the team aware of the ECHO? I think I've seen a couple where the whole team wasn't aware that it was, the presenter really came on and did it on their own. So just making sure that the team was aware, including the family. Make sure that the family knows what you're doing. This is about them. This is about their child. Having it be family centered. I know that the families can't participate in the ECHOs due to confidentiality, but making sure that they're aware of the process. Something that I always did is it was really the family's decision to go forward with an ECHO. It would be something that I would bring up and say that it was an option for them to move forward with. I would get their permission to move forward with it. I'd let them know kind of what the process would look like, and I would include them in filling out the consultation form. They are the experts on their own family, on their own children, on the background of what has worked, what hasn't worked. So I would send out the consultation form to the team members and the family. They'd come back to me and I'd kind of combine it to make it flow a little better, make sure all of the information was on there, and make sure that all of the personal information was not in there. I think I spent a lot of my time just editing names to she, her, they to make sure we were compliant with the ECHO rules. So just make sure that they all know when it's happening. And then once it's completed, send out an email either directly after or grab some lunch, and then send out the email just letting them know, hey, we did this. This was, we're waiting on the recommendations to come back. It usually takes about a week to get it back from your coordinator here at ECHO. And I know that you aren't typically writing down information because you're going to get it in the recommendations, but I know I always did, and my team members always did, jot down 2 to 3 ideas that we really loved. So in that email, I would send out to the team, thanking them for being a part of the presentation if they were on there, and then letting the family know we're getting these recommendations in about a week, but here are 2 to 3 examples of what the ECHO team recommended for us. So I know you're not going to be able to see this, but I wanted to include, this is an example of the recommendations that you get. It's very overwhelming, especially the first time that you get it, because there's so much good information in there. So what I would typically do, and I'm just going over what we did in Athens when I was there, do whatever works for you all. I would read through this first and then send it out to everyone. I would make sure that everyone on the team, including the family, had a copy of this. I would then pull together a family team meeting with the full team. This process usually took more than one meeting, especially when the recommendations looked like this. I've gotten recommendations that were smaller. This was one of my longer ones, but typically it takes 1 to 2 meetings to go through it, 1 to 2 hours each for those meetings. It just really depends on how many questions the family has, how many recommendations you're going to go through. So make sure in those meetings, if it's in person, have a copy of the recommendations printed out for everyone. If it's virtual, make sure you're sharing your screen and going over this. I went line by line in the recommendations, which is why we took a while, especially if you can see how many pages this recommendation was. I just always did that for all of my families. Some of the families struggle with literacy, so I didn't want to assume that all of them could easily read it and easily understand. So no matter what family I was working with, I just read it line by line to them. And like I said, I sent this out beforehand, then set up a meeting. So hopefully the families that don't have issues with literacy had a moment to kind of look over it. And if they didn't, then we're going over it together as the team. What we did was we created a document to track the activities chosen from the recommendations. So as we're going through line by line, the family can say, oh, we've already done that. Here's the information on that. And we can kind of mark it off. And then for the other recommendations that we decided to move forward with, we created an activity tracker, and create something that works for you, works for your team. What we did was we created just a Word document that was an outline form. So I'm going to give you guys a few examples. So this recommendation was talking about puberty and hygiene, and having several books available through the Ocali Lending Library. They had the specific titles and authors that were recommended there. And you can see on the right-hand side, our activity tracker, we had it lined up. It just so happened that the numbers lined up, which isn't always the case. But we have, recommendation number 8 lines up with activity tracker number 8. We just concised it down to puberty and hygiene. You can see what the recommendation is. That way, when we pull up the activity tracker, we don't have to also pull up the recommendations if we don't need to. In yellow, we have that the SSA that was involved with this family was going to be ordering 2 of the recommended books on there. So this is kind of a living document. So we start with, okay, here is what the recommendation is. Here is in yellow, who's going to do it and what they're going to do. So in this case, the SSA ordering those 2 books, and we pull it up every meeting. So then the next meeting, we got an update. The books were ordered, and they were delivered to the family. So we go ahead and mark that green so that we can just keep track of it. We don't delete it. That way we can just keep track of who it was. If something comes up, say the family loses one of the books, or one of the books gets destroyed by someone in the home or an animal in the home, we can look back at our activity tracker and say, okay, the SSA is ordered it. Let's see if we can go back to that SSA, have that ordering information, and just get the same exact thing for the family. Another one here you can see is the discussion of sensor cameras with the parents. This family in particular, there were some issues with the cameras in the home. The family was concerned with it, with some privacy. And then in the meetings, they said, it's not really the privacy now that we're thinking about that is our concern. It is the fact that we need wireless cameras. There's no way to safely have it if it is a wired camera with the children in the home. So after a discussion with that, which, you know, it's family centered, we have to respect. If the family would have said no, then we kind of just move on, bring up the camera every now and then as an option if they need reminded, but make sure that we are respecting their wishes in their home. They were interested in cameras, but only wireless options. So you can see in yellow there that we were looking into wireless camera monitoring systems. At one meeting, we found some, we sent them over to the family for approval. You can see what is crossed out, that we were going to have to request funding from cost review from the SSA. So being FCFC, I was the funding of last resort. So this kind of details going through that process. So the SSA was going to go ahead and go to cost review, see if that would be covered through them. They went, it was denied. And I asked for a letter to be sent to FCFC, as well as the letter that would go to the family, so that I could then take it to my council and get the approval from there. As you can see, we were waiting on the family to send the preferred system. They were within a specific budget. And then you can see the date there. Approval will be decided at the November 2nd cluster meeting for FCFC. We ended up approving it and ordering this. It's not reflected on this activity tracker. I had to cut it out so that it would fit on this slide. But you can update that and say, you know, approved, camera delivered, and in working order. So really just kind of keeping track of each step, whatever works for your team. We liked it this way. That way we could, you know, make sure we were crossing our T's and dotting our I's. Longer recommendations.
I'll tell you, that big Sandy store, they got some open box ones from $600.
If you could mute yourself, unless you have a question, feel free to unmute and interrupt me. But for kind of longer recommendations, like you can see here, our outline would get a little bit more detailed. So routine visual schedules, making sure that the girls in the home, this echo was actually unique, where we presented on 2 siblings that were in a home of 3 siblings total, and we were presenting on 2 of them at one single echo. So we were talking about what routine looks like. This was in the height of COVID, in the height of shutdown. These girls went to our local schools and needed more routine because everything was shut down. They weren't having that daily routine of going to school, having their teachers involved. So we were talking about what was happening in the home. They had 1 school day in person at that time, which was kind of throwing everything off. So we were getting a written schedule from the staff at the school and a written schedule from the staff that was in the home, providing services and support for the family and the girls. So you can see crossed out there that we were getting those schedules completed. Mom provided the schedules, and then we added that to the ISPs for each girl. That way it's not just documented here, that we were actually having documentation in their individualized service plan through the Board of DD as well too. We were getting visual schedules at the home for each one of the girls, since that seemed to work at the school. And what we did was the SSA reached out to the teachers, and we got the same icons from the classroom to use at home. That way their visual schedule was the same no matter where they were. So we were able to print, laminate, and prepare for family use. We were having an issue with routine-wise with staff not filling in those weekend shifts. So you can see we contacted provider agency. Saturday shift started, was supposed to start on October 8th, and then there were some issues, and then you can see in green that the independent provider was going to be starting on November 7th. So just keeping track, like in those previous activity tracker examples, of everything that we're doing. Some stuff might get missed, like we don't have in green that we actually provided the visual schedule on there, but that's something that as a living, breathing document, you can go back and say, oh, no, we already did this, mark it green and move forward. So you can see kind of this example of everything that we did, you know, what was crossed out, what was highlighted in yellow, and what eventually turned green. So kind of as we move through the step, we update it. So the first meeting would include, you know, sensory assessment, the I and the one. Then, you know, the OT provided what was needed, and it was discussed at the October 9th meeting. So at the October 9th meeting, we would update it. So the behavior support specialist would write up a report to include in the ISP. Then the next meeting, we would get an update. We'd pull up this tracker and say, okay, hey, behavior support specialist, did you do this? Is it completed? And they would update us and say, yes, it was already written. We included it in the ISP. It was sent out to the family. They signed it. They approved, you know, everything, and we're good to go. We'd mark it green, move on to the next one, and kind of take it meeting by meeting, updating it. Some of our activity trackers got a little crazy and long, but that just means we're providing this support to the families. We're following the recommendations. We're following up on what we're doing. It keeps everyone accountable. There were some in here, I think down at the bottom, you can see that the family has activities to do as well. It wasn't just relying on the providers. A lot of it was providers doing the recommendations or getting the recommendations set up, but occasionally the family would be in charge of something. So that is included down at the bottom where it's talking about water play, having the family reach out to the PE teacher to schedule time at the pool since it was going to be on their time after hours. And you can see that they were able to do that. We got the after school time for the pool scheduled, and the girls were really enjoying it, and it was really helping out with some of their behaviors. So every now and then we included that good stuff. This is a really thankless area and job. So every now and then, you know, throw in those feel goods, because sometimes, you know, coming to ECHO, there aren't very many feel goods in there. So throw those in there so that you can look and say, okay, we did something, it's working, girls are enjoying it, and it's really helping out the family. So this is an example of this family's full activity tracker. You can see it goes into the third page. This is old. This is from 2020. So it is longer now. This is just the copy that I had. That was the easiest without names in it to edit out. Most of what we did mirrored the recommendations where we would keep it free of names and specifics. But once it got deeper into who was doing what, names would usually pop into that. That's why this one was kind of the easiest. It was just easier to mirror the recommendation, to follow along with it versus getting confused. Okay, girl one, who was that? Was that, you know, this girl or was it that girl? We just kind of followed along with that. And like I said, this one was unique where we were presenting two girls at one time. So it is a living, breathing document. This document started off as just one singular page, and then over time grew into what you see here. And then past this, it grew even further. At one point, we did stop utilizing this in team meetings because we had completed almost everything or our priorities shifted. So that is okay. This was kind of what we used with all of our families at the beginning, just to keep us on track, keep us organized, because a lot of the recommendations are multi-pages, and it's hard to really focus in and prioritize what you're going to start with first. So having this document really kept us focused and really kept us accountable for what we were going to do, who was going to do it. Was it going to be the speech language pathologist? Was it going to be the SSA? Was it going to be the family? Was it going to be me as FCFC? So it really helped us kind of make sure we were on the right track. Some of the things you can see remained yellow. That just means that our priorities changed, and something happened where we had to shift and pivot and move our focus, or we completed it and just didn't mark it green. But we knew we had gone on. I think most of them, it was we just shifted and had to look at something else that was coming up that was more important to the family at that time. But having this let us at least go back, and if that became a priority again, we could go back and say, okay, we've completed, these steps. What do we need to do next? I think one of them, if you all can see it, is number 3, the food selection. That's something where we pivoted and didn't come back to that. The family really decided that looking into container and storing options just wasn't going to work for the space that they had in their kitchen. But I know it came up in meetings afterwards where we could go back and kind of look at what we had already discussed so that we weren't starting from scratch and say, okay, this is what you had said previously. Has anything changed, or does anything need updated? And then move from there into the new portion of the conversation, what their new needs are, or is it the same need, they're just frustrated and we need to come up with a new solution versus the containers. I wanted to include this quote. So the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing, by Walt Disney. So a lot of my families would talk and talk about what they would do. They really need recommendations, but then the action wasn't coming from either the team or the family. So that's why we kind of developed this activity tracker so that we could make us accountable for that action, that we wouldn't just talk and say, cameras would be good. It would help, and then not bring it up again and come to the next meeting and just kind of troubleshoot the issues that they were having in that month. This kept us really making sure that we were doing the recommendations, that we were moving forward, as opposed to doing an echo, seeing all the recommendations, then putting it in the file and never seeing it again. So it really made sure that the SSA, that the whole team, that FCFC, the family, were included and accountable for doing something to help stabilize the children in the home, which is what we all want to see. Or, for some echoes that I did, bringing that child back home and making sure that we were able to successfully stabilize them there versus having them removed again for, whatever reason, by JFS or going to residential. So really taking the recommendations and putting them into action. Does anyone have any questions? I have done quite a few echoes. So I am open to walking anyone through or answering any questions, walking anyone through the process that I did to prepare. And afterwards, I have my contact info on there. If you were at the previous presentation that I did about the Appalachian Children Coalition, our email has changed. The previous email still does work, but we have a new URL. Our previous emails were ridiculously long and nobody liked them. So we changed them to much shorter, user-friendly emails.